Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 621. My opponent kicked off with e4, and I went for the Sicilian defense with c5, and now he goes d4, immediately challenging in the center, and introducing the Smith-Morra gambit. Now it looks like you don't have to take, you can decline the gambit right away with e6, although I took, and I think that's the normal way of responding. After e6, let's see what could happen here. Knight f3 would just transpose back into a normal Sicilian. That would be a open Sicilian with e6, either a Khan or a Taimanov. Or d5 here, pushing on, looks like an interesting option. Or c3. I think if I were white, I would probably just play c3 here and just hold on to that big center. And it seems like that's not too challenging for white. So the main move here is to take that pawn, ask white what he's up to. And now if white takes back with queen takes d4, that has been played before, and you can gain a tempo on the queen with knight to c6, similar to what happened in the game. This position is a little more common. This queen takes d4 idea is a little more common after black has played the move d6, because then the knight on c6 can be pinned by the bishop. So queen takes d5, I guess, is not so great here. The other way to round it up is to play knight to f3. Try and pick the pawn up with the knight. But the usual idea here is to play the gambit, the Smith-Morra gambit. And now accepting the gambit involves taking on c3, and then the knight will take back. And you can see that white has great open lines for both his bishops, easy development for his pieces, and he's just given up a pawn. So it's a pretty good position for white. White has a lot of compensation for the pawn. Unless you become an expert in the Smith-Morra, it's pretty difficult to play against. So I usually decline it, and I usually play the move knight to f6, which is counterattacking this e-pawn and forcing him to decide how to defend it. And notice that this pawn on c3 is blocking the knight, so the natural knight move to defend it is not available. So after knight to f6, then pushing the pawn forward is typical. But let's back up to this position. I think it's also an idea here, even though it's way down on the list. I checked this out with a chess engine. It's a similar kind of idea. You could also play d5 here, counterattacking this pawn. And once again, he can't defend it with the knight. So the main line there goes pawn takes and then queen takes. And then he can take back here, but then he's got an isolated pawn that you can play against. So, or he could play knight f3. Maybe that's the reason why you don't see this so much in the database. Knight f3 allows him to conveniently recapture the pawn. Although I suppose you could always try e5 there. Anyway, that's another. It looks like an interesting way to play. If I get tired of this knight f6 line, I might try this d5 idea sometime. Anyway, but knight f6 is the way I usually play this. And then almost all the time, people will push on with e5, and we transpose into a line in the Alapin Sicilian. So just to show that, e5 kicks the knight hops into d5, and you see the numbers of games. It goes way up here. And then there's different ways to play it. White can recapture that pawn right away, or it can develop the knight to f3. That's a little more common. And knight c6, and cd, or bishop to c4. That kind of stuff. So I've played this position many times, and it's okay for black. White still has a little bit of initiative, so by declining the gambit, you allow white to keep some slight opening edge, but this playable position for black, and fine. Okay, so but he instead of pushing on with e5 and going into main lines, he played queen takes d4, and we're just out of the opening book. But queen takes d4 is good for black. This is another case where I can play knight to c6. There's no pin on this knight because I haven't moved the d-pawn yet, so his queen has to move. So I gain a tempo here. And now I played g6. I thought about a6, but then I realized that a6 doesn't stop the bishop from coming out and pinning the knight anyway, or not pinning it, but putting pressure on the knight, because his queen has a pin on the a-pawn here. But when I looked at this with the chess engine later, I thought it was pretty interesting that a6 was one of the top moves. And after bishop to b5, it's playing e5. And it likes this position for black. It thinks that white would now be forced to take. and then he can develop here with knight to f3, attacking this pawn, and I would have to find a way to defend it, probably bishop d6. But, well, this would be a game, and I've gained the bishop pair. So a slight edge for white, and that would, I mean, for black. So that would be kind of interesting. But what I thought was really curious is why is he taking? You know, why not keep that pressure there? He's got the pin, and just develop the knight here, knight to f3. Just a normal developing move. And it turns out that then I can take on e4. The defense of the pawn on e4 by the queen is not effective here because the queen also has to maintain this pin to protect the bishop. And after queen takes, pawn takes, well, once again I gain the bishop pair. I suppose he can get a pawn back on e5 here. But anyway, I just thought it was interesting that a6 really is a move here because of the fact that the queen becomes overloaded, trying to hold on to everything, doing all those jobs, pinning this pawn and holding on to the e-pawn. Okay, so I played g6. Still, this is all keeping in the range of about even. The valuation shifts back and forth between even, a little better to black, sometimes a little better to white, but actually a pretty well played game through this part. Both of us were thinking about our moves and doing a reasonable job here. I go bishop g7, so he brings his bishop out to b5, trying to discourage me from developing my pawns. I just castle, so now I can push this d-pawn forward, but anytime I do, he's going to at least win a pawn here on c6, and he wins it with tempo against my rook here, so it's kind of annoying. That is, if I push this d-pawn forward, he can take twice on c6, end up with the queen there hitting my rook. So anyway, this does apply some pressure to my position. Keeps me a little bit disturbed, I guess. It forces me to think. Anyway, he develops bishop e3. I play queen c7. Now I'm preparing to move my d-pawns because I have this one of these pawns, because I have my knight adequately protected. Still, moving the a-pawn has no effect because the knight is still undefended over here. Even though I've castled, I need to push the d-pawn and then move the bishop out of the way before I have an actual threat with a6. So that's what's kind of slowing me down here. But he has to take time to develop his pieces too. So finally I get in this d6 move, and he castles, and bishop to d7. And now I'm ready to play a6 and kick the bishop away. And you see that you can see it's a balanced position. He's got maybe a little more center influence with this advanced pawn, but I have a very sound pawn structure, and I have some play against that pawn as well. He plays rook a to d1. I go a6, kicking the bishop, and the bishop retreats back to d3, defending the, adding another defender to his e-pawn, so it's very solidly defended now. And I hop in with knight to e5. Yeah, he could just take here and give me some doubled pawns. That might be an interesting way to play, but he decided, oh, he can't take right here. That's right. He has to retreat his queen. So I was able to play here without getting the doubled pawns. And he goes, oh, here I go, knight f to g4. That was my idea. Now the other knight. Knight to g4. So I am, if he takes my knight, I can take back with the knight. And otherwise I'm putting some pressure on his dark squared bishop, trying to gain the bishop pair. So he plays bishop to f4. And I come in here with knight takes d3. So he sort of had a choice of which bishop to preserve of his bishop pair, and he chose to give me the light squared bishop and keep the dark squared bishop. It's not a bad choice. He gets his queen and rook lined up in a battery on the d file. Let's see. I played bishop to c6 here, trying to get some more pressure on the e-pawn again. He goes rook f to e1, defending, and I go b5, scanning a little space here on the queen side. I can retreat the bishop and maybe get some pressure against the c-pawn. Also keep his knight from hopping in here. Let's see. He plays h3, kicking my knight back, and I went back to f6, still with this idea of putting more pressure on the e-pawn, but I don't ever get a whole lot of pressure. In fact, he dissolves it immediately with e5. So the chess engine likes this move, knight e5. This is still in the range of about even, but knight e5 maybe is a slightly better move. If he takes, which is the main line, he takes, I take, and then his bishop drops back to e3. I've got doubled pawns here, so it's not too attractive, but I have ideas of maybe pushing the b pawn forward to create weaknesses over here, and I have rooks to the d file coming out quickly, and I can still line up on the e pawn and maybe generate a little pressure there, and I do have the bishop pair, so it's an interesting way to play. It's not clear to me that I would, even knowing that Chess Engine recommends this, I don't know if I would play that way, because you're saddled with that pawn weakness for the rest of the game. Anyway, but I play knight to f6, and he pushes on with e5, and then this sort of dissolves his weak pawn. D takes, knight takes, and then I went knight to h5 here, going after his bishop. I could have dropped my bishop back to b7 maybe. Yeah, but I'm worried about, he's got tempo moves with the knight. Yeah, I guess I can't play that, because he could play something like knight takes g6, hitting my queen and hitting my rook. So I played knight to h5, hitting his bishop. So if he goes with his knight g6 trick, I can take the bishop here, attacking his queen. The queen moves, and then I can take the knight. I should come out okay, or he takes my knight back with his knight. Still should be okay, because my queen is on that. So that all works out all right for me. He just retreated his bishop back to h2, and now I took on h5 to eliminate this threat. He takes back with the bishop, the discovered attack on my queen. That's the threat I'm talking about. And then I line up over here looking at his g2 pawn. He plays g4 here, kicking my knight, and this maybe is a bit of a mistake. It's kind of a weakening move, but still okay for white. White is still okay here. The first mistake actually comes later in the game. He trades off, king takes, queen d4 check, block with f6, and then he brings his queen over to c5, looking at this pawn here, which I need to defend with rook f7. And now he plays knight b3. So knight b3 is actually the first mistake of the game. He needs to do something about my threats on the long diagonal, maybe just playing something like f6 to try and keep that shut, and with the knight there defending the f6 square. And that would lead to a trade, though, wouldn't it? Let's turn on the engine just for a second and see what the engine recommends here. I didn't write it down. I didn't make a note of it. So instead of knight to b3, he could play something like queen to e3 or f4. Let's take a look at queen e3 first. I come in here with the bishop, and then just f3 would trap the bishop. Okay. So that's the way to play it. Let's turn the engine off. So when he played knight b3, actually, that's the first blunder in the game. Someone commented there was a lot of blunders in this game, but actually we played a really good game up to this point, both of us. And but knight b3 is a blunder, and now I am winning if I find the right continuation. So I started out with the bishop here, and he has to run. There's a threat of checkmate. He runs with king to f1. That's the only move here. And now here's your chance to improve on my play. What's the best continuation here? And just see how deeply you can calculate it. Go ahead and pause the video if you want some time to think about this. Okay, well, the move I played was queen g2, and that's not the right answer, so let's back up. It's the other check, bishop to g2. And if the king comes out this way, then you have bishop to f3 check, and you win the exchange. So that's point number one. And point number two is that if the king goes this way, then you can grab the h-pawn, and you're still threatening checkmate. So he needs to do something to stop the checkmate, and the engine line goes like this: queen d5 to block the trade, and then take the pawn. So the the best I can do, according to the chess engine, the best play here leads to an advantage of either the exchange or 2 pawns. Those lines are fairly equivalent, being up the exchange or being up 2 pawns. I guess I was looking for something more. I mean, it looks like a dangerous attack here. The problem is I don't have an easy way. I can chase his king to the e-file, but I don't have an easy way to exploit it. If this pawn weren't here and I could bring a rook over with check, it would be a different story. But in this case, it just, as it turns out, that bishop g2 check and gaining a few points of material is the best I can do here. And when I play queen g2 check, it's no longer winning. This is just even position once again. In spite of the horrible appearance here, I chase the king all the way over to d2 to an open file where I can bring a rook in with check. Well, he could just keep running with the king. He makes a second mistake here by playing knight d4. And the problem here is that I was starting to run low on time, or getting nervous. I don't know what it was, but anyway, definitely blow the rest of the game right here. So there's an immediate tactic. If you want to pause the video here and see if you can spot the tactic. I think I mentioned it during the video because I noticed it like a move or two later. Okay, this is a very simple tactic. It's just pawn to e5, exploiting the pin. A knight there is not really attacking my queen. It's pinned against the king, and I can push my e-pawn forward without even exposing my king. My king is still pretty safely tucked away here on g7, so this doesn't even open up a diagonal to my king. So that's the move, e5. And I didn't play that. What did I play here? Oh, I played bishop g2. I was getting the bishop out of trouble. And he plays king c1, unpinning his knight. And so now my queen is hanging. And I need to do something drastic. But at this point, I am, because I missed this tactic here, that was still I still had an edge at that point. At this point, white is winning. And there's even best play wins for white. One line, for example, is to just give up the exchange here. Take the knight off so I don't have to deal with that threat. And then I can try and play for compensation, grab some pawns over here. But white can push his pawn forward and take advantage of that pin to save his g-pawn. So I just have one pawn for the exchange, and he has active rooks, good position. He can weaken my king side here, and I can't, it seems, exploit his weakened king position so easily. The other try would be queen f4 check, which is a move I thought about. But the problem with queen f4 check is that it puts the queen and the king in this forking square, so I have to be pretty careful playing this. So he blocks the check, and now I have to play a move like king to g8 to get out of the fork. And once again, it's a position where white is better. My pieces are just awkwardly placed all of a sudden, and my attack on his king seems to have disappeared. So pretty amazing. Anyway, yeah, this loses the pawn here right away, I guess, because I haven't had time to defend that. I've had to run and deal with all these threats. So, but the move I played was just crazy. Rook d6. Well, I was blocking the queen's view of the e7 square and forgetting about the fact that my queen was hanging. And he forgot about it too. Played this check, but this is still winning. Actually, my best move here is to give up the exchange once again and play on the exchange down, try and gather some pawns over here, and go for compensation. But white is better in this position. But in any case, I ran out of time. So I thought it was a pretty interesting game. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you again soon. Bye.